have with us, I'm going to go to the presentation first. Tuan Leaders is here to talk to us a little bit about the Lower Chattaquin River challenges and opportunities. I know many of the council people went on a tour with Tuan over the last several weeks to tour some of the issues and challenges and problems going on there. So he's here to kind of walk us through, and I mentioned to him that, even though some of us have had the individual tours or group tours, to kind of get it out there in the public, or public know what's going on and some of the issues with Chattaquin. So you're on.
Thank you very much. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to do this. So myself and several colleagues from Washington Conservancy, as well as Ms. Uzo and Justin Miller from the Tree Guys, have been looking at the Lower Chattaquin River for quite some time. We've been involved in projects in the Upper Chattaquin River, and kind of making this arbitrary division between Warner Dam and up being Upper Chattaquin, Warner Dam and down being the Lower Chattaquin. It's totally arbitrary too. There's some real challenges in the Lower Chattaquin River, but there are also some really incredible opportunities, I think. So I wanted to share with you a little bit about what we've been seeing. For those of you who haven't had a chance to go out there yet, and even though you're going to see some pictures here, I also really would encourage you all to go and take a look if you have a chance, because this past Saturday, when we suddenly went into like tropical heat wave mode here after 10 inches of snow, we had 10 inches of snow melt off running into the Chattaquin. So it's about as exciting as it gets right now. It's working. So just really quickly, those of you who are not aware, there's 5.75 miles of Chattaquin River within the city limits of Jamestown, which is in itself pretty good to think about. The section between McCray Point, the Upper Orange Arrow, and the Warner Dam is less than a mile, 29 miles, and it's where all the attention goes to the river, because it's the connection to Chappaqua Lake. It's the obvious spot that seems to be the obvious driver for economic development. It's also more navigable, so boats could potentially come down from Chappaqua Lake into downtown Jamestown. But then there's that Warner Dam right in the middle, and beyond that, there's 3.5 miles of Chattaquin River that has not really gotten any attention for what seems like quite some time. And I want to show you what that looks like. So the Chattaquin River, you can roughly break it down into two types of armoring. So parts of the river are hard armored with retaining walls, with riprap, with rock walls. Parts of the river are not armored and just have urban soil types that are just there, that are vegetated, that have been shoveled over, built upon for sometimes centuries. It's unconsolidated soil. It's not really kept in place by anything but vegetation at this point. Just to give you an idea of some of the things that we're seeing out there, that's the retaining wall right opposite the Chautauqua Center. The left picture was in July this year. The second picture was in October. The retaining wall that's supposed to keep the bank in place has already been broken in half. The water of the river is actually going behind the retaining wall. It's an accident waiting to happen. It's a liability waiting to happen right there. So just some quick examples. Stormwater drains right by the Warner Dam. Water is supposed to go through the pipes, not over top of the pipes. So you see challenges like this throughout the entire length of the river, where banks are washing away by the simple existence of rain and gravity. And there are things that we cannot prevent, will always be there. So I think it behooves us to maintain the water quality in the Chattaquin, keep runout and keep erosion from happening by armoring these banks properly. This is right by Buffalo Street. There's a Hatwater Dam that I'm not entirely clear serve any purpose anymore. There are things like that that need to be revisited. If you look at the current in the river right now, that's a really dangerous situation. People go to that river, people fish there, people swim there in the summer. It's easy to get caught in that undercurrent right there. But more importantly, if you look really closely, here too, you'll see parts of the retaining wall have completely broken to pieces and falling apart. Erosion's taking place. And just look along the river. Look at all the trunks that are coming down. These are one of the biggest issues that we need to tackle right away. There are a lot of dead trees that over time have rolled downhill into the river, that have accumulated in places, they're falling down. If I'm in the same place and look the opposite direction, you can see the foundations of the Dollstone factory right there. It's kind of a good indicator of what the river is. There's a great blue heron flying off right here, indicating how alive this river still is. And at the same time, there's a log caught in one of those channels. And it's just one that happened to be there when I was there taking that picture. But I've been there several times where entire trees get jammed in there, block up one of these canals, and it becomes an obstruction for the river, and the water has to go somewhere, and it tends to go places where we don't really want it to go. Because these kind of things happen. This is just downstream from the Dollstones factory by Hawkins Avenue. The area by Hope's Windows where the Chautauqua River gets really close to East Second Street is really, really treacherous. Look at the amount of debris that is accumulated here. Just to give you an idea of how close we're cutting it, this is Jamestown Scientific right here. The robo buildings, look at the Chautauqua River coming within inches of their foundation walls at this point. The entire bank that used to separate these buildings from the river has eroded away just by the simple current that just goes through there and the lack of any kind of vegetation that can stabilize these banks. This is what it looks like yesterday. Looks amazing that that place is not on the water already. This is just upstream from there. There are enormous piles of woody debris in there. Entire tree trunks. The river actually branches right here and has carved a secondary channel behind the debris and behind the dam right here. Earlier in the summer, you can see a little bit more of this dam right here. You can't really see how much is there right now, but I'm estimating there's at least 5.5 to 6 feet high wall of wood that's kind of piled up underneath that river right there. So when you think about these obstructions, when you think about the possibilities of the river, when you think about the abilities to use the river, for example, for kayaking, for canoeing, is absolutely impossible right now. It's tremendously dangerous to take a boat out in this river because you just don't know what's underwater. What's also really critical is that, especially right now, these obstructions cause the river to not properly drain floodwaters from the city. So areas, neighborhoods, backyards, businesses are flooding right now because the river cannot simply discharge the water fast enough because of these obstructions. I just want to show you just really quickly. This was yesterday, right by 2nd Street. Look at how close those cars are at the top of the bank. So these vertical banks over here, this is 2nd Street, there's Sherman-Williams up here. These are vertical banks that have just been caving in as the water washes by there. It just eats away the sediment, it just caves in. I want you to take a look at this spot right here. It's my favorite spot on the river. See those trees right there? This is actually a homemade retaining wall made out of old car tires. This is a whole stacks and stacks and stacks of car tires that clearly have been there for decades based on the size of these trees right here. This building is literally kept from falling in the river by a stack of old car tires. The only reason why the stack of car tires is still there is because there are trees growing out of it. The only thing that keeps this bank in place is healthy vegetation. Trees, right? Tree roots that will actually tie together the banks like that are a much more stable, much more resilient way to armor the riverbank than any kind of cement wall. Cement walls break over time, the water will go behind it. You can armor your section with a cement wall, and you're just moving the erosion one property downstream. The next stream down that isn't armored is going to get eroded away. So trying to keep these shorelines alive and living with vegetation that belongs here is the most resilient and most cost-effective way to stabilize these. You know, if a log comes floating down the river and takes a chunk out of the bank, the trees will regrow and it will self-heal the section of the bank. If that section was armored with a cement wall and the log would come floating down the river and take a chunk out of it, you'd have a chunk out of your cement wall and it would erode away over time. So we're dealing with unsustainable stabilization in this river. Oh, I gotta show you this section too. This beautiful section of the Chautauqua right here. See how close the properties are? The section that you're looking at is actually not the Chautauqua. The Chautauqua actually flows behind there. The Chautauqua actually flows behind this, what is now an island. And the river has cut an entire new channel in here in the last couple of months because the water has been consistently high this year. In the historical maps, this section is actually labeled as a lost island. It's now no longer lost, it's actually an island again. We have actually gained an island in the middle of Jamestown that we didn't even know was there because the river is now forced to just find its own course. It cannot run through the regular path because of all the obstructions that are there. And by doing so, every time a tree goes down and the river gets diverted, it eats away at the banks that are not stabilized. And if you look at these businesses, if you look at how close those cars are parked to the tops of those banks, there is no bank left anymore in a lot of places here. So I think it's time that we do something about that. Yeah, here too. Another challenge too that we're dealing with is that with the water going so high because the river doesn't have the capacity to drain the water fast enough, a lot of these trees that are keeping the bank together are now growing in the water for extended periods of time, which is not good for trees. Trees will die, trees will fall over, create even more problems again. So it's time to make sure that we have a better understanding of where the shadow flowing needs to go, that we can keep it where it needs to be so that we can control any kind of flooding, and really mitigate the challenges that we're seeing with the trees that have already fallen in the river and trees that are about to fall in the river. There's so many trees leaning over right now that could easily fall into the river at any moment and could cause the river to divert into somebody's private property, into somebody's business, or could really cause injuries or loss of property. An additional challenge that we're seeing right now is that over time we've lost a significant portion of our trees in the city. Emerald ash borer has been hitting really hard the last few years. So 20 to 25% of our trees in the city are ash, and they've all been dying recently, and they're now falling over or have fallen over already. When those trees disappear, more sunlight will hit the forest floor, or at least the banks, and it creates opportunities for invasive species to move in. This is all Japanese knotweed. This is a whole section of hiking trails that exist behind Hope's Windows. There's this beautiful setup, there's a tiki bar in there, there's all kinds of good stuff in there. But you can't use it because it's completely buried under invasive species. Now, to the layperson, this might just look like green vegetation, and it's fine, green is green, right? The problem with these invasive species is that they outcompete all the native species that actually have the ability to survive out here and that have the ability to stabilize their banks. So all these areas that are being invaded by these invasive species, no native species grow anymore. Most of these knotweeds only grow a few inches deep. They don't keep the sediment in place. So every time a washover occurs, every time the water in the river goes up again, the knotweed get washed away. It creates another infection downstream. If you've ever been in Faulkner Park, it's just a massive sea of knotweed. And it leaves just exposed soil that will just wash away the mess that's left there. You can contaminate the water of the river, and it just leaves behind a barren wasteland. Now, all of this could be changed if we removed all that. Oh, just another reminder too, the emerald ash borer has killed the ash trees, and right now, after every windstorm, you can find entire treetops just speared into the ground from other walking paths that are baked by Hope's Windows that encourage people to use these trails and enjoy the river. So there are real life dangers, real liabilities out there that need to be mitigated. So in the last few months, we've put together a plan, a proposal to actually improve the safety and the resilience of the river by removing all this debris so that the water can actually flow where it needs to go, and we can keep the river within its existing banks. We can remove the dead trees and the hazard trees that are standing on the banks that are still standing right now, but in the foreseeable future will fall in the river and we just create another problem down the road. And also deal with all the compromised trees that are now leaning over the river that are at risk of creating other obstructions downstream. Now, once you remove all those trees, you're creating additional conditions for these invasive species to move in. So there's a necessary sequence in how this has to be tackled. You remove all the hazard trees first, then immediately you remove all the invasive species, and you plant those same areas with native trees. You can seed with grasses and native plants. You can plant shrubs that grow well in wet conditions, but in any case, plants that belong here, that survive our particular climate, that don't need a lot of maintenance, and that can root deeply enough so they can keep the soil together and stabilize these banks. So it'll become a living shoreline and also an asset, a resource for the city. It will become a beautiful place that people would like to actually enjoy and look at. And simultaneously with the restoration efforts, we propose that we develop a master plan for the Chautauqua River for the entire length of the river, which looks at all the banks for the entire 3.5 miles between the Warner Dam and the Faulkner Village line, and identifies and maps in all of the trouble spots that exist along that bank. So 3.5 miles, both sides, and 7 miles of riverbank where there are trouble spots that need to be addressed. I don't think anybody in this room right now has any idea where those spots are. We're literally at a point right now where any of these banks could collapse, and we wouldn't know until somebody would pick up the phone and call City Hall. We just don't know. So in order to get ahead of that, it behooves us to make a plan to at least map in at least trouble spots and spend some time aligning those kind of projects that need restoration in the future with potential funding opportunities as well. And there are funding opportunities. There are all kinds of different mechanisms in place to address these kind of issues. It's just that at this point in time, we're not ready to even apply for grants because we don't even have the necessary information to do so. We don't even have the right information to make the case that a water quality improvement plan or program, for example, could be applied. There are funding streams for climate resiliency that we're not addressing right now. There are issues that we could address. There are all kinds of different mechanisms that we can use to actually stabilize and reactivate the section of the river. But in order to do that, we need an initial investment to actually get to that point. And that's why I'm actually mostly here to request from the city some support through the American Recovery Plan Act to actually become a catalyst to get this process started, to actually remove however many decades of deferred maintenance to the river and actually proactively deal with this river and try to get ahead of all the issues that are just waiting in line to just become liabilities to all of us. Yeah, so the sequence of events is really critical here. The sequence of actually removing the hazard trees, removing the debris from the river, but also then immediately after that, removing all the invasive species. Because if we don't do that, they will spread in the empty spaces that we've just created. So we'll just pick a bigger problem. One of the things that I've been noticing in the last few months is that a new invasive species called tree of heaven has been moving into the city. It's a fairly recent arrival, maybe 2 years or so by now. And it's really spreading along the river corridor right now. Tree of habit is a really tough one to get rid of. If you let it grow too long and you have too much of it, it becomes nearly impossible. We're at a point where it's still possible to do this, actually get ahead of it. The added bonus, if you will, for tree of habit is that it's also the primary host plant for spotted lantern fly, which is a known pest that is not quite here in Western New York yet, but it's doing tremendous damage to agriculture in Eastern New York already and south of us in Pennsylvania. So even just by the sheer fact that we have tree of habit in the city, we're putting ourselves at risk for bringing in another invasive pest that could annihilate our agriculture at FDHE. So there are a number of reasons why we need to get ahead of this situation right here. So I think what we have is a really unique opportunity to proactively address this, rather than just waiting and wait for things that will inevitably happen, because it will happen. It will happen. So this is what we've been able to come up with so far for a tentative budget. So I broke it down into year one and year two. So the bulk of the phase one, the bulk of the funds needed initially will be to actually clean out the river and clear out the path so that we have unobstructed flow of the river again. We don't have to worry about flooding as much. The challenge with that is that for a year two, obviously the bulk of the debris will be removed as soon as possible. But in year two, we don't really know how much is underwater at this point because the river has been so high for as long as we've been looking at this through this lens. That built into the budget right now, we have a contingency of about $100,000 for additional removal of materials in the water. It's a total guesstimate at this point, but it's the best guess estimate. Invasive removal is an ongoing process. It'll start in year one. If funding would be available through ARPA, year two would also need some funding, but actually the year two budget number right there includes also a year three for chemical treatment. Some of these invasives need to be treated for multiple years in a row to truly make a difference. And if we don't remove them all, they'll be back again. It needs to be done right. And then vegetation is also included, revegetating effects. Risk assessments, it's really mostly the plan to develop the plan that actually lays out all the different future projects that could potentially happen in there. But the plan should not just be damage control, it shouldn't just be mapping out problem spots. It should also really involve the community, all of the landowners that have property along the river, and actually work with them to truly activate this river. This river is an asset. This river has been an asset for the city for as long as the city has been here, or longer even. So by only focusing on the 0.9 miles of the river that's upstream from the Warner Dam, we're really doing ourselves a disservice. There's 3.5 miles more riverfront available in the city that could be developed in a very similar way as all the discussions are indicating we can do in the upper level of the river. It involves neighborhoods that are underserved at this point, so I think it would be really exciting to have opportunities for other neighborhoods as well to get involved in economic growth and revitalization of their neighborhoods. It would send a really strong message that the river is important to the city, and also that the people who own property next to the river have, you know, the proper recourse with the city that there are people looking after. So the exciting thing for now is that we're currently working with the BPU to actually stabilize a section of their bank already. So the BPU has already requested help to remove the steel retaining wall, and they're replacing it right now with a living shoreline. They're actually letting me build in a turtle beach because I think turtles. So.
I don't want to get all the pictures.
No, I didn't put any turtle pictures in this time. But it's nice to see that, you know, that there are opportunities for corporate and private partnerships there. And I can see already that the limited attention that we've been given to some of these companies that are on the river, they want to help stabilize it. They want to make it a better place. So BPU is already doing this. They're already paying for some bank stabilization and doing it right. The Stocker Center also is interested in doing some restoration work. They applied for funding through Commons and were just awarded $10,000, which they then gave to the watershed conservancy to actually do the initial phase of the plan. So I think if we get into the opportunity to actually really do this master plan and really reach out to all the neighborhoods and all of the different stakeholders that are involved right here, I have a feeling that there's going to be a lot more interest for people who would like to see the backyard safer and better and energizable and exciting. So I can see this really becoming an energizing project and not just deals with deferred maintenance, but really a first step towards energizing the river and a section of the river that has not gotten any attention for a long time. So thank you for giving me some time to explain it to you. I'd love to take people out to see it in person. If you're ever interested, just give me a shout. I'd be happy to answer questions too.
Just a quick question, I can see the grand total, okay. That would be all from the ARPA funds, or could that possibly at least start it up and then just other grants?
It could be, yes.
So it could be a mixed bag?
It could be a mixed bag, and just to reiterate too, so there's $100,000 of contingency into phase 1, year 2. And then phase 5 is also an entirely in contingency. Like I'm not anticipating too much of this, but there's a real possibility that once we start to remove debris dams, that we will find exposed, unhardened shoreline that would become really vulnerable to erosion once we remove the debris dams. So I can see a need for interim stabilization with rock riprap, something like that. So these are numbers based on projects we've done in the past where, you know, stabilizing a couple 100 feet of a shoreline just because you have a sensitive spot. Just in the interim to buy yourself time to actually apply for funding to do a more long-term restoration effort there. So there's $185,000 in the 633, 634 that are contingencies at this point already. Yeah. What I do think is important for you to realize though is that the river is in flood stage and has been in flood stage pretty much since July, June, July. So generally, when we go into the winter, the river is down. You know, we've had a dry hot summer and water levels go down. In some cases, in dry summers, the Chattacoin, the lower section, can dry to a trickle. It's flying right now. It's in flood stage. They're yards of the water. We haven't even started our snow season yet. So I'm generally concerned about next spring. If we don't see this water level drop significantly in that few months, we're going to have some real issues on our hands in the spring. So I do want to convey to you some sense of urgency. The other aspect of that too is that I need debris removal and tree clearing ideally gets done when the ground is frozen in the winter, when you can actually get equipment closer to the water when the ground is hard. If that even happens this year. But there too, I think that if it were possible to start a project like this, I would really urge everybody to consider doing this as soon as possible so we can really get into this winter.
I have a question. In terms of the chemical treatment that you're talking about,
Yeah.
what impact does that have on the health of the river and what's in it?
It doesn't, it all, obviously, everything has to be permanent, so it'll have to clear all of BC permitting. But the species that do require chemical treatment, like tree of heaven is amazing. If you cut it down, it comes back tenfold. If you cut it down again, it comes back hundredfold. You have to stem inject it with chemicals. So you're literally injecting chemicals in the stem of these trees. It doesn't go anywhere else but inside those trees, and it's the only way you can get rid of it.
So like bamboo?
It's not even about, no, it's this thing, it looks like sumac. It's right behind, it's right the fire station, the fire training center, like the whole area is completely covered in it right now, and then start buying. Yeah, that'll get out of control if you don't get rid of it.
That's the question I was gonna ask. I know it's been a hot button topic with, spraying chemicals in the lake every year for people.
Yeah.
I wonder if are we gonna run into the same issues if we're spraying now?
We're not spraying, this is, at worst, cutting a stump and dabbing a little bit on the actual
Okay.
cut stump, so it goes into the roots. Most likely will actually be injecting into the stem or doing a little cut and then painting it on. Yeah, there's no spraying involved.
Okay.
Just a quick, I don't know how many went on a tour of that night when I went that day. One of the things that is remarkable is to see that, because we don't normally see the tributaries and just the sheer speed of the river was pretty amazing. I didn't realize how fast it was going, the tributaries that were coming off of it. One of the things that was interesting, just a quick thing about the turtles, we have the most turtles in the facility.
Yeah, so there are 5 different species of turtles in the Jamestown River. And one's an invasive, 2 are state listed, and 3 are pretty common. But one of the state listed species, the spiny soft-shelled turtle, is a species of special concern in New York State. And I've been studying for several years now, and every year when I have to file my permit report to DEC, I'm always leery to actually give them the actual number of turtles that I've seen, because that number would actually qualify to be delisted from the endangered species list. We have that many here in Jamestown, but nobody else has them. We're the only place in New York State that has these turtles. Yeah. I don't know why, but they're here, they're right in the city, breeding, yeah.
Is that gonna be an issue if we start messing with their habitat?
It'd be great, we'll have more of them. I
Oh,
think.
okay.
Yeah, no, I think there's so many assets in the river, the river otters, there's all kinds of great stuff in the river that I think if we really truly clean up this river and develop it in a way that would become more interesting to people, there's a lot to see there. I think we have right now, for up to 170 some different bird species that we've documented along the river corridor so far. Right in the Jamestown, in the city, who has that? Right, so there's an asset right here that could be developed, and right now we're just ignoring it to death, unfortunately.
One other quick, I don't wanna take too much time, but I did ask you today, if I put you on the spot, when we were down there, we noticed there were several deer,
Yeah.
and we got another deer. If you got 30 seconds to a minute, you
Sure.
talk a little bit about deer management and your take on what's going on in Jamestown. I know you got a problem with it, and
Yeah.
any insight or?
Yeah, obviously that's a can of worms
Yeah.
there, so this is just me speaking, not the Washington Conservancy, but, as a conservation biologist, the impact that deer have is far beyond just a nuisance. I don't care if they eat my hostas in the backyard, that's the nuisance level. But what we're seeing is that there's invasive species that are super costly to maintain, and you have to stay on every year and spend money every year. Those are the few things that the deer don't eat, they eat everything else. And so, it's one of the main drivers why we have a lot of these invasive species, is that the deer just eat everything else and leave areas open for these invasive species to come in. I've had Lyme disease and other tick-borne diseases 5 or 6 times right now, and it's terrifying, it's absolutely terrifying. I have friends who are really, really severely debilitated, I have friends who died from tick-borne diseases. The deer population skyrocketing is a major driver for that. And when I moved to Jamestown 9 years ago, I came from Connecticut. I was a Connecticut state conservation biologist for Connecticut Audubon Society, and I was managing 2,500 acres of wildlife habitat, and including the old Lyme area where Lyme disease got its name, and it was horrifying. I worked my entire life in the tropics pretty much. I was more worried to do field work in Connecticut than going to Africa. would take pills and make sure I got my shots and I would be prepared, and it was ready for things to happen. But in everyday life, in places like Connecticut, or really at this point, anywhere along the eastern seaboard, it's just horrifying. It's everywhere, they're everywhere. They're in your lawn, they're in your car, they're everywhere. You just pick them up in your clothes and my infants had, my little baby had, and pick on her because I walked to the woods and probably shut one inside the car and she just had my little, there's no escaping these things. So, I don't know why this is such an underreported and underfunded health crisis, but it is a health crisis. And it's to a large extent driven by explosion of deer population. And the lack of large predators, there's nothing that keeps the deer in check. The only predator they have around here is vehicular traffic. Right? It's the only thing that takes them out, which is a really sad situation. So again, as a person, as a biologist, I would love to see the deer population reduced. And unfortunately, I don't think there is a middle ground for that. There's no sterilization program or any kind of other mitigation program that could gradually reduce the population. As far as I'm concerned, the faster, the more we can reduce the population, the better. It'll bounce back. But I think that that has to be a hard line to what we can tolerate in the city. Moving to Jamestown and coming from Connecticut, it was a relief. I can't tell you how much of a relief it was to be in an area where there were no ticks yet, and it was born diseases. And 9 years later, it's caught up with me. I got Lyme disease last year here in Jamestown. And with anaplasmosis earlier this year, it's still on the woods all the time. But it's just a start. We're just seeing it. Like Connecticut right now, I was just there a few months ago. They have something like 11 or 12 different tick species. They have Lone Star ticks in Texas because everything just moves so easily and so quickly. So whatever we can do still to keep the deer population down and keep the tick populations down, we'll be okay in here. And we're going to be better off than anybody east of us.
Thank you. This is a valid question because
No, it's.
they were hopping around the river when we were.
They are, absolutely, yeah, and it's still very localized. The big issues are real, but they're very localized still, but it's just a matter of time before they are. And I think we may still have a chance to actually get ahead of that too.
Any other questions? Thank you.
Thank you very much for your
Very
time.
good.
Thank you, sir.
Move on. At this point, we have opportunities to address the council, bring in here the council. Chance to see you.
I'm Doug Champ, I live at 225 Bowling Street. I know you've heard that many times before, but that's required, so I introduced it. I'm on a kind of another track of trying to inform the council on the aspects of what's in front of them tonight in the resolutions for voting. I'm all for a very aggressive ARP spending program. But what I'm concerned about is how it's going to be evaluated and levied out and measured in terms of what it is that we're trying to accomplish. Again, I'll cite what I call the 3 pillars of our basically public health, public safety, and economic recovery. I don't see much mention within the administration's work on public safety and exactly how that pertains to what that particular pillar is. And I'm concerned that it needs more attention. I spoke about equipment. Tonight I want to speak a little bit about manpower and the need for that to be tracked into the plan for our communities, specifically on the healthy community aspect of the neighborhoods. The COVID virus expresses itself to everyone in different ways. We have vaccines. We want people to be vaccinated, but our fire department reacts to the needs of people in our community. And what they're up against will continue to unfold and maybe in different forms. And I'm not putting them on the spot, but I'm just wanted to know how would 4 new firemen work for you, over the next 3 or 4 years? And would that be an important investment in public safety under the ARPA protocol to enhance this community's health and safety?
As far as staffing the fire department goes, any
Yeah.
additional staffing will certainly be an asset to us to be able to address the call volume and to deal with the increases that we've had over the last few years.
So not only would it accomplish one of the major goals of enhancing the community's public safety, but it also would satisfy some of the major requirements that you're up against in manpower, EMT, and a variety of other things associated with answering response calls associated with specifically COVID issues.
It would.
The same thing goes for the police department. As you all know, I'm an advocate for strong public safety for our community. And I believe that the police department is gonna be under increased need to be involved in some of the things that we're promoting as healthy and safe communities, specifically with the demand and need of mental health and the combination approach of how we treat it locally. Staffing requirements and needs for them to interact. And I would ask the chief the same thing, with 4 new patrol officers, enhance your position to, I guess, work on the aspect of public safety regarding the police department. And, that also would be an investment for the future, because I believe in both departments, you will have retirements over the next 4 years. So we'll satisfy a requirement of getting trained people on board, while those people eventually will retire and replace those people. So indirectly, you're going to have manpower available to you for this period of time, but also have them trained for when those other folks are not here. Would that be correct? Okay. In regard to some of the other stuff in these resolutions tonight, what I'm concerned about is blanket platform funding. In other words, I understand that you need to do this, and you should do it, and I'm not telling you not to. But what I'm telling you is accountability and measurement of what you're gonna accomplish is extremely important with these funds. So if you're gonna spend $5 million on economic development this next year, and then $5 million next year, what are the projects? I know you can't tell me that, and you shouldn't if you do know. But how are they gonna be measured out, and how are they gonna perform, and what are gonna be the jobs? And where are they going to enrich the community for job creation, job retention, and new equity investment within our community? And like I mentioned before, it can't be just but-for situations where things are saying, but for these monies, we can't do the project. There's gotta be an equity platform, like you buy a house, you put 20% down, what's gonna be the formula for that investment, is what I'm saying. I don't see that, unless you're gonna identify later on, and you can move set bundles of money around, so that if you go through next year, the year after, and you need more money in one other area, you can move it around and not be held back by the Department of Treasury and say, well, this is your plan, and you gotta stick to it. You can't do anything else, can't change it. In addition to that, you have 2 positions, and those 2 positions they're not spelled out in here unless you read that. A project manager, and a communication coordinator, which are the $900,000 transparency and accountability platform. You have tranches, you talk, one of your major tranches, whether you like it or not, is $900,000 to evaluate and improve and develop a systematic measurement so that the Department of Treasury really thinks you're doing a good job and you can prove that you are. But why 900,000? Nowhere in the regs, and it never states that you had to have a certain percentage given to that value. Now, we just heard a presentation, and I've worked with Twan and other projects in other places, including the city of Jamestown. Highly trained, highly valued for our community to have him, and we need to work in the Lower Shattuck Fund. So some of that money could be spent that way, as it could be in other ways. But $900,000, this is what you're looking at approving tonight, a platform for $900,000 for transparency and evaluation. Why that much? And I will cite this as another example, is a county, which is $3 million less than you, is allocating $250,000 to do the same thing, under a contract basis, and not necessarily with full-time employees. These are the options in front of you in this future of our community and how we use American Rescue Plan. It's a dynamic program that we're not gonna get another opportunity to do. How we measure it out, how we spend it out is critical. Unfortunately, as I've said before, we got this money because people died from the COVID virus. Now we have variant viruses. It will plague us for centuries, unfortunately. But we're going to have to deal with that locally as best we can. So I'm sorry to take this time, but it's critical to me that when you approve things, that you invest in the future. Yes, you can do the platform bundle approval, but you've got to have documentation and understanding of what you're really proving later down when you actually accomplish these things. So, I'm only a citizen. I can only do my citizen thing. You do your legislative thing. The mayor produces his budgets. He's done as best he could with what he has and where he's at. Now it's all that you have to decide on where you're at and what you want to do with this money. I just want to be sure that you do it right. Thanks.
Anyone else raise their hand? Don't see anybody else. We will move on to our committee reports. Kim, finance.
We have quite a few resolutions. The first resolution is to adopt the American Rescue Plan Act Recovery Funds Master Plan to expend the American Rescue Plan Recovery Funds received. This was not approved through finance yet because we felt as a council we had not discussed that and owed it to the entire group too. I just want to go over what is in the mayor's plan presented to us. Lost revenue is $10,179,145.no. That's 36% of the 28 million. Roughly. Roughly 35% in economic development, which is $10 million. Roughly 18% in healthy communities and neighborhoods, $5 million and no cents. 7.1% in water, sewer, and broadband, that's $2 million. And transparency and tracking is $900,000 for 3%. We'll talk about that at the end. I'll read through the resolution first. Second resolution, same case scenario. This is for funding a position which was referred to as the transparency portion. This is one project manager in the comptroller's office. This equates to roughly a cost of, just so everyone is aware, roughly $474,167 for the 4 years. Again, not approved by finance because there are a lot of recommendations in the plan I submitted to you guys to fund one, to fund none, to fund the combination of all of these positions that were presented in the ARPA. So, resolution number 3. Authorizing the Jamestown Local Development Corporation to expend up to $10 million and no cents of the ARPA recovery funds for the purpose of economic development, of which only $5 million and no cents may be spent before the city of Jamestown receives its second group of funding. Again, that was brought up that without some little more development on what that actual economic development plan is and the detail of it, that 10 million was a lot. Again, that's 35% of it, that we needed to have a little bit more, at least guideline. There's some sample projects, I get that, Mayor, but we just heard from one that isn't in here, right? So where does that fall? Does that fall in economic development? Does that fall in you know, so I think some of these things that we may have not heard at the time you submitted this plan are just as important and need to be addressed. So given that, I think we need to have that discussion as an entire group. Resolution number 4, same case scenario. This is funding of the other position, which is the communications coordinator. Again, that's part of the $900,000, but this equates to $399,584 for the term of the ARPA funding. Again, more discussion to be had. Resolution 5 and Resolution 6 and 7 are all change orders to concrete work. Resolution number 5 is for the work on Bowen Street to Price Street to Faulkner Street. Contract with R. Patty. It's a total net change of $4,134. That was approved. Resolution number 6, authorizing the mayor to execute change order number 1 to the cold mill and order overlay on the 5th Street project from Washington Street to Prendergast Avenue. Contract with Lakeshore Paving for a total change of $42,245.85. That was approved. Resolution number 7, authorized to execute change order number 1 to the 2021 Jefferson Street reconstruction project from 8th Street to Isabella with R. Patty Concrete and Excavating for a total change of $12,071.25 increase. That was approved. Resolution number 8 is talking about a grant application with the New York State Homes Community Renewal to utilize $60 million of Community Development Block Grant funds under the Coronavirus Aid Relief and Economic Security Act to help communities through the state to safely reopen and restart their local economies in the wake of COVID-19. This is the approval for the City of Jamestown and the Department of Development to submit a grant based on CBDG-CV activities of the Chautauqua Center Behavioral Health Facility of $500,000, Chautauqua County Health Network Public Health Campaign of $100,000, and the Jamestown Strong Starts Project $322,300 for a total cost of $922,300. Crystal, I don't know what else you want to add. If anybody has any further questions?
I talked about it last week, but if there's any additional questions, feel free to.
Anybody have anything? Okay. That was passed. And resolution number 9 was that the city controller is authorized to make the following amendment to the 2021 general fund budget for the multi-factor authentication. Increase appropriations 7,500, decrease appropriations contingency count. I did note with Corporation Counsel that I did receive an actual quote from the IT director, Mark Dean, and it had only part of it. There is an additional charge they're going to be ironing out with comptroller this over the next 2 weeks, but this 7,500 looks like it falls in line, and this authentication process is something that is required from the insurance company because of the critically confidential information that people have access to. Many companies in the private sector use that as well. So that was it for resolutions. Obviously, you heard a great presentation from Twan regarding the Chautauqua River. I submitted to all you and the department heads the list of ideas that were brought to me from various council members. If you can look through your list and note some of the things, suggestion came from replacing one police vehicle to replacing all 5. Suggestions also came in, anything that had a 0 on it, there was no comment from any council members. Again, these are all up for discussion, so there was, the other big one was the eliminating the disc golf at Bergman, eliminating the dog park, funding it less, and funding it at its full force. Other big things of contention that were brought to me was not funding the assessment reval. Obviously, I didn't touch the contingency number because of anything that was totally left alone. At the bottom of this section, also there were options for eliminating the IT analyst, then keeping it full. Parks Department laborers, there was an option for all 3, all 2 positions and 1 position. Eliminating the ombudsman position and leaving the maintenance. Adding Chautauqua Riverfront maintenance was brought, adding equipment, adding the Glock trade-in, the shooting range, and funding something in deer management was also brought up. So that's what you have in front of you. I realize it was late today. Unfortunately, a lot of council members didn't get to me with any suggestions till the 9th hour, so did the best I could to get it to you before tonight. One thing I did kind of sort of add, now if I can find my numbers, just to give you idea on personnel, what is currently budgeted in the ARPA plan of the mayor is 1.3 million. What you were presented today from finance was the additional police officers, adding 4. I know Mr. Champ brought up adding 4 firefighters. You can roughly assume that that's going to be pretty close to that number as well, just for sake of ballparking. Behind that is the city fleet prioritized lists of all the cars that, and vehicles, parks, streets, not just cars, but equipment needed, prioritized by each department and what that cost is for your review. And then is a list of the 2022 capital projects by priority by department. So each department had went back through this list and put it in priority level for them. Okay? And the last thing was the cost of the 4 positions, 1, 2, 3, 5, excuse me, and actually the 7 total for those years, for the years. First year, I guess, excuse me, this is only 1 year. That cost total, just for your reference, $485,055.43 for those positions in 2022 alone. Okay? So what I'm asking is this council, I know we don't meet next week, it is a holiday, but I feel we need to continue to have this discussion before the voting session. And really, again, Mayor, I heard Tony say it in the meeting, there was no, definite. I had a question for the Corporation Council, I wanted him to answer that. If there is a suggestion to move some money, not necessarily fund the broadband, can we leave it in healthy in the water and sewer, or should we move it to housing? And what is gonna be the legality of us being able to do that? Is the federal government gonna say, no, you earmarked it for that, it's gotta stay in there? So I asked Corporation Council to do a little research for us, so we knew that. Because unfortunately, I don't think, everybody has speculation. No one has a definite answer.
Sure, I can provide some context if you'd like, Franklin.
Yeah, I just don't want us to get locked into a position where we realize broadband is not equitable with the private sector in the business of it, and now we've got it locked in. I mean, obviously, we could use it in water and sewer, but if that's not a case where we could use that, that limits us and prohibits us from moving it out of that bucket. I don't wanna get locked in.
The other question I brought, goes along with what Kim said, was these large chunks of money in these different, like lost revenue, economic development, and so forth. And again, asking Elliot, how much of that could we have leeway to move, if you're just approving the concept of the general fund, of where that money is spent, then when you get into the details and like you say, well, maybe we give money to someone else, maybe we, change something. I mentioned we still don't have numbers yet on the infrastructure stimulus bill.
Right.
So that could change broadband, that could change water, sewer, that could, so I guess the question is, how much leeway will we have as administration, as a council, that 6 months down the road, we say, well, this priority has changed, we want to move this amount of money from here to here, for this project or that project, or if it's infrastructure now, if we get an extra few $1 million, whatever we get from that, we don't know what we're gonna get for that yet. That changes the game plan, and we'll have extra money spent in a different pot, so to speak, so that's kind of where I was at for that.
Well, the other option,
Happy to address that.
Mayor, that you could possibly do is you could, if we can get these answers on buckets, if you will, is that this council votes in December and get the buckets going, right? And we don't do any positions or anything else until we get that in January, when we get that finality and that. I just am concerned, greatly concerned that, we're gonna lock ourselves against the wall and and we're gonna live and die by that sword, and, you know, this riverfront is concerning to me. So, I don't wanna drag our feet, but on the other hand, if this is as critical as it's being portrayed to us, it's a concern, so.
May I address that?
Yep.
So there's a couple things. Number one, in terms of riverfront, we've had separate meetings with the Chautauqua Watershed Conservancy about that, and we believe that we can find funding within the ARPA funds. Doesn't have to come from lost revenue. There are other opportunities there. But to address your immediate concern is that under the text of the law, and although Mr. Amato provides some insight to you guys, a plan is not required by a municipality as long as it's spending qualifies under the categories. So the master plan is a practice that other communities have done and what we have done as a city for several different things. It does not lock you in. You can move the categories later on. This is a way for us to then let our departments know, like, we are ready to create those projects, which will ultimately, each project, each program, will come before a public body, right? And almost all of them come before the city council, except for the economic development, which will be JLDC, and then any project over $100,000 still comes before the city council. So to briefly answer your question, you're not locked in. It's like every other plan we adopt. This is a plan, this is an idea, this is how we want to spend it, but you can always move that funding around if you feel like, hey, there's a better opportunity here. We don't need $2 million for water, but we really need $2 million for some type of project, or a road, or the waterfront, right? Those are all an opportunity.
So are you saying that the buckets are finite, but what we do with what's in the buckets?
You can change the buckets, but the idea of the plan is that we listen to the community on kind of what general funding should be, and we kind of have a plan to say, all right, we want to be able to spend on those. They can be shifted around, they can be moved, but once you as a council approve that master plan, then we'll have our departments start to work up and create the programs that we will ask you guys then to approve under each of those spending categories. To answer your question?
It does.
And I know Mr. Armando will follow up as well.
Yeah, I would like to see that. I mean, and I know that the riverfront doesn't fall under lost revenue, but it needs to fall somewhere.
We are 100% supportive of that, and have been working with them on an amount.
I think that whole end of the river has been kind of out of sight, out of mind for many years, decades, and it's a mess.
I will say we are gonna lay claim to the lost island.
Also learn.
That was it out of finance. We have no, need for executive session, no claims, no anything, so we're all open session, all as you know right now. If council members would like to add anything to this ongoing list, I would suggest you get it to me and we just keep record of it somewhere. You wanna add something, you want something off, let me, and it's not on here, let me know. I mean, obviously the amounts are subject to whatever, but at least get it on there so we have visual of it.
I have a question about when do we finally make that decision, I guess, Ken, you said you had some requests for 2 additional police cars, or 3, or 4, or 5. When is that final number set?
That would be as we set this bucket, okay, so if you're gonna, in lost revenue, we have $10,179,145. Okay, is that 10,000, when we start approving all these projects, is that 10,000 covering 1 police car, 5 police cars? Is the 5 was not in the original plan, so what are we backing out? Each of these have to go through council to get approved as a project, no different than anything else we do, so. It's gonna be an ongoing budget thing.
I just wondered, when is that number decided? That's all.
You have to vote on the buckets first.
Okay.
We'll vote on the buckets first, and
And then it becomes the.
then as each thing comes to us, probably each month we'll have a series of projects and things that will be put up and discussed.
Well, actually, there is a capital plan right in front of you guys, that you guys have been working through, Councilwoman Eklund has been going through based on your recommendations. The longer you wait on saying we're okay with these, right, the longer it takes us to start working on those projects. So we're really pushing for you guys. Now remember, this is lost revenue. We're taking lost revenue by law, can be used for any general service, right? And so we estimated that amount to be about 10 million. We already can take 2020, 2021 and apply these to capital projects. But we need an indication from you all on what those projects are going to be. So if you wait and you want us to come each month with those projects, it's just gonna take so much longer. I can tell you one police car now is, what, Chief, 18 months out?
The last time we ordered a car was April of this year, and we still don't have it. And we don't know an ETA either. So 18 months is a safe estimate.
I agree with you, and I understand that, but in all fairness, I think every council member deserves to look at everybody else's options. To me, this is
I
no
agree.
different than a budget. So I think you all deserve to look at this. What I would suggest is that you get your answers to the finance committee or myself directly, what way you wanna go, and I can narrow it down. Okay?
Okay, any other questions?
So were there any discussions on changing the bus?
No, no, and that's the other thing, there was one recommendation, a couple recommendations, but we didn't have the answer if we had to keep it in that bucket and just, you know what I mean? Leave that as the 10,000 or 2,000, whatever that number was, and just leave it in there until we got this answer from Corporation Council. So, yes, there was a discussion, but no resolution.
The question was whether we were limited by certain percentages within any particular bucket, that you can only change, say, 10% of what you had allocated. But they're saying it's more of a general thing, but then if you took, say, 20% out of the, lost revenue, could you put it into economic development or healthy communities? Or could you put half of it into that if you decided that you needed to put more in public safety, as we've been brought up a number of times dealing with COVID? Is that, is that healthy communities, or is that about economic development, since it's impacting small businesses, but it's also impacting the health of the community in terms of all the shutdowns and problems that people are having with COVID right now? So I don't know, that was the question that we wanted answered, is there a limit to how much can be transferred out of any particular bucket to another bucket, or the stuff within that allocation?
And to, Mr. Champ's statement, and I know I've said it over and over, that this is COVID relief money. So what are we doing, and this is just something for you to think about, what are we doing to protect ourselves from a future pandemic or an ongoing COVID relief? Are we giving the tools to these departments the ability to help businesses, to protect our firefighters and police and parks department and anybody else for a future pandemic? So I feel we should be looking at those things, and department heads, if you haven't included that in here, I suggest you revisit that in the next week, because to me, that's important, because the government's not gonna say you're gonna get 28 million next time, because you should have been better prepared.
But I think, correct me if I'm wrong, wasn't the allocation for the Chautauqua County Health Network and Jamestown Strong Starts having to deal with some of the issue of dealing with COVID and education? And was the Strong Starts was dealing with the younger kids and prenatal and postnatal, especially for families with addictive behaviors, and, okay? So I think some of.
That's a separate grant.
Right, I know, it's a separate grant, but there is a significant amount of money if that is done, if they propose. I'm just saying, there is some allocation from that particular.
And I know I've talked about it, we have a blank line in here, I have no idea what the detail is on the fire department upgrades, station upgrades, but I know I have talked to Chief Coon, what are we doing at Station 3, that if we get another COVID outbreak, that we don't have to close it for a year because the sleeping quarters are too tight? To me, that's something that this money should be looking at. We should not have to close a station for a year at a time because of COVID, right? Obviously, it's a rotating basis and it's gonna close, but we should maybe look at perhaps moving an officer's bedroom somewhere separate so that those other two are 6 feet apart. I know I discussed it with you. So, to me, that's what some of this money should be looking at as well.
we definitely encourage all of you, if you have those ideas, to talk to us about that, right? Because we've not heard of those things, we need to know about them in order to prepare them. And so get as much information as you can, talk to us about it, so that we can make sure that that's included in the plan.
I think we also need to have faith in our department heads as well, that they're going to pick the right projects and spend the money the correct way. And, I mean, these are professional people that are putting these positions, and we need to have faith in our department heads that they're gonna do the right thing, and they're gonna be, these projects are gonna come in front of us anyways to look at. So we need to get past, approving these buckets and start moving on some of these projects and have faith in our department heads that they're gonna do the right thing.
Move on to public safety. Yeah.
We had three resolutions. First is setting the regular meetings of the city council of the city of Jamestown to be held in the city council chambers on January 31st, 2022 at 7:30 p.m. Scheduled Monday evenings after the 2022, same time and resolution. And that's approved. We also have a resolution approving following organizations that gained a chance bell jar license for the 2022 calendar year: Jamestown Lodge number 263, KGL Elks, Taco Area number 2145, Fraternal Order of Eagles Incorporated, and Jamestown Vietnam Veterans, and the Iowa Spring Veterans Club Incorporated. Third resolution is authorizing the mayor to approve and execute an affiliation agreement between the city of Jamestown and Jamestown Community College, 535 Falcon Street, Jamestown, New York, for the purposes of establishing a joint educational program for students of the emergency medical technician program, subject to the agreeable corporation of council's form. Queen's addressed this. He's been involved with the training. The students need clinical hours, and had a problem recently with COVID getting the training hours at UPMC or through All-Star. So this would be a formal thing to allow these students to get the training, clinical hours with the Jamestown Fire Department. Also could be used as a recruitment tool for the fire department, showing some of these students what goes on with the fire department as it needs in its fire department. Resolutions. Any questions on those resolutions?
I'm assuming you're covering liability and all that other stuff in that agreement?
Yes, it's currently being covered by JCC.
All right, we did have, two tour rate card requests, Johnson Family Towing LLC out of Stockton and Evans Towing out of Pittsburgh. Those were both approved. Just to note, the Evans Towing, information came Friday after the attorney came out, so it was on that. And also we had one cab rate card for Rainbow Cab, this is in Jamestown, and that came in on Friday as well. That's all we had from, public safety.
Now we'll move on to public works. Mr. Nelson.
Thank you, Mr. President. We had three resolutions that, and they were on, Finance Committee too. Well, the Bowen Street concrete work from Price to Faulkner, with Arcade Concrete. And that was for a total change of $4,134. That was approved. Our second resolution was, for a change order on the work done on Fifth Street from Washington to Prendergast Avenue with Lakeshore Paving, for a total change of $42,245.85. And Mark is here if anybody wants to ask any detailed questions on that about flat work or curbing or gutter or.
We did actually have a question, why did that go up by $42,240?
So-
Did they do more paving than anticipated, because it was a significant?
They did,
Yeah, you're right.
they did more, flat work, so more sidewalk than anticipated.
Okay.
And that money was part of the state touring route money, which is a pot of money that the state gives to municipalities for maintenance in their routes through the towns.
It was a new fund.
Yeah, no, it's just a significant enough increase, and actually, as I was looking, first I thought it was a cost of materials, but then I looked, now there was a lot more.
Right.
A lot more done.
And the third resolution, was again another change order for, with R. Patty Concrete, and excavating for additional curb and sidewalk completed on Isabella Street near Eighth, for $12,071.25. And I guess that was just an increase in the scope of the project after the bid. And, any other questions, Mark? You can't answer, but that was also approved. Yeah, you go ahead, state. But that was it from Public Works.
Is there anything else before we go to the mayor's portion or not? Matt, you up?
Okay, sounds good. President Dole said there's no Bills game tonight, so I can say, for a long time. Just a couple items I do want to point out. Number one, as of today, we did take possession of the Hartley property, and we'll start to work on planning for renovations and changes to that property. Just to keep the council aware, we did not purchase the full amount of the property. A portion of the property was actually purchased by a developer. So some of that property will stay on the tax roll and will be used for development of a business on a portion of that site. Just a heads up on that one. The other thing I just want to point out for the rescue plan funds, I'm glad that we're making progress on the master plan. It's been 209 days since we received $14 million in the bank. At the end of this month, we'll report to the Treasury that we have spent $0 of it. So we are required to report that at the end of the year for the quarterly report. I also want to take a little bit of time and just go through what you all received, the 2022 capital projects based on priority. I think Council Member Eklund pointed it out, that you guys received it. It includes a whole bunch of stuff, including vehicles, which are prioritized lists based on JPD, parks, DPW, fire, all of those different vehicles. Fire not so much, there's only a few regular vehicles there, as well as additional cost outs of positions. But I wanted to point out a few things. I know many of you are looking at it. There is a huge need that we try to get this resolved by the end of the year so that we can move into next year with capital projects. I want to point out a few things to go through it. We did have each department rank some of the priorities here, just to point them out. All of these, I believe, or all of those should be in your budget book. There should be a template project on each one of these. The first priority for the police department is 4 new officers, amounting to about $206,000. Second priority for police is replacing 5 vehicles. Of that 5 vehicles, the executive budget did include lost revenue funding for one of those. Obviously, there's been some discussion on how many you'd like to replace. We did fund portable radios, or asking for funding for portable radios through the lost revenue line. That's $144,000. That's the third priority for the police department. The fourth priority is the shooting range at $190,000. And the fifth priority is a virtual reality training at $62,500. None of those two have been or were funded under the lost revenue line item. Number 6 was Glock trade-ins at $9,000. One thing that was removed from this list is the trauma kits. Those are actually already in our police cars. Those were replaced quite some time ago. Is that correct, Chief? Right?
Yes.
We replaced them a while back. The first day we put them in the cars, they were actually used. The second day, I think. So they worked out really well so far. Under parks, we do have some ranking here. The first one is a new roof on the parks building. That's $250,000. None were included under the executive budget for lost revenue. 3 laborers obviously were requested. That cost is also included in here. And please feel free to stop me if you guys want to talk about any of these projects. We want to make sure you've taken a look at this. The second category, or second ranked parks item are water lines at Bergman, Roslyn, and Jackson Taylor. That's 1.5 million, not recommended yet to be funded under the lost revenue category. Press box at Dietrich Park, 33,000, that was recommended to be funded under lost revenue. Third category, walkway pads at Dietrich Park, that's 10,300, that was recommended to be funded under lost revenue. Going down the line here, parks projects for the band shell painting and concrete repairs, that's $80,000. That was not yet recommended. And then the grandstand structural repairs at Dietrich Park will cost us about $300,000. And there are some other priorities here. Obviously, you guys can go through those. For parks, there's a lot. Dan did a great job of putting them all together. He did a huge wish list. He actually gave it on a giant piece of paper, a couple pages. You can probably have the engineers print that out for us, but we were excited to see those. Ones that we have identified to potentially recommend under the executive budget for lost revenue. Signage for all parks and buildings, $30,000. Disc golf at Bergman, $12,000. Hand dryers at all parks to replace paper towels, $12,000. Water heater at Dietrich, $18,000. Baseball, softball playing surfaces at Allen, Roseland, Nordstrom, and Bergman, $40,000. And playground at Nordstrom, $180,000, as well as the dog park at $250,000. That amount has gone down per council's request, just a heads up on that. Not on here, although I do want to point it out, it is the playground near Tower Street. And I always get this wrong. Willard, right? Willard Park. It was listed at $400,000. We are doing some site work to determine what is underneath. It used to be in Dan, correct me if I'm wrong, a school.
Yes.
So we're not quite sure what's underneath yet. So it is a top priority to do that park, although it is not listed here. We do believe that can come from other ARPA categories once we complete some of that site work to figure out what's underneath. Right. That's really the tough one. We're not quite sure. Are we going to find an old teacher's board, or are we just going to find rubble? We don't know. Let's see. Tony, your time. You guys need a new board in your classroom? Why the time? Okay. Moving on to the next page here on the DPW projects. First one listed was for the new roof repairs to the city buildings. That's $400,000. It was not yet recommended under lost revenue. Second priority is a salt branding de-icing system at $100,000. It actually does provide a savings to the city in order to get a new machine. Third down is traffic control signal equipment at $35,000. We always like to have an additional one on spare, just in case something happened, or it was not recommended under lost revenue category. Fourth one is 3rd Street improvements at $380,000. We believe there's some opportunity there for additional grant funds, as well as to put it under a different category. So it may not be funded under lost revenue, but there are other opportunities there. And then the fifth one on DPW is the school crosswalk improvements citywide. It costs us about $450,000. No lost revenue allocated to that as of yet. So there's a couple other ones, other priorities down the line there. You can see we did not fund them under the executive budget for lost revenue. Obviously, if you all want to do that, please feel free. We then have under fire top priority, 8 new firefighters. Year one cost $609,000 approximately. That was not funded. Roof replacement for Station 4, about $92,000. We did recommend funding it through lost revenue. Fire did a backup generators and switching equipment in Stations 3, 4, and 5. It's about $150,000. We did ask to fund that. Truck room floor renovation for Station 5. If any of you have been in Station 5, it needs a floor. So that's about $150,000. What was recommended to be funded. A citywide Knox box system, for those who don't know, that is where keys are normally kept on a premise that allow the fighters to get into a building, commercial building. Many other cities do have this. It's a modest cost of about $10,000. Really isn't that much, probably more. Overhead doors at $60,000 on fire. Entry fobs for Stations 3, 4, and 5 at $6,000, which were both all recommended to be funded. Entry doors at Station 4 and 5 at $25,000. And going down the list of priorities, things we did request, additional things requested to be funded. Interior renovations for Station 3, 4, and 5, around $30,000. Partial walls on Station 4, about $10,000. Under IT, network infrastructure upgrades, $42,200. That was the top priority. We do also thank you guys for doing the multi-factor authentication. That's another layer of security for the city, so thank you for that. We do have an assessment reevaluation at $285,000. Recommended requested lost revenue of $285,000. A bill pay kiosk for City Hall, $15,000. Also requested that under lost revenue. And then there's some CHIPS Street reconstruction, CHIPS Street resurfacing, things we do every year. We did allocate a contingency. I know Councilman Reckman, you pointed out, that's stayed the same. Contingency is just in case projects go over, $411,000. We also built in an assistant public works director for $104,000. That is an all-in cost. It is not meant to carry on forever. That's only meant to provide a transition period. And IT systems analyst at $92,000 again, all in cost. All these projects should be in your booklet, your budget booklet as well, if you want some more additional detail. Obviously, if you want to fund certain things, talk to the department head. Other things, if you have other projects that you want to fund, please bring it to us so that we can talk about it. As of right now, we're not spending any time on other projects that aren't in this unless you guys talk to us about it so we can build that project in advance. Yes?
I want to go back to the roof repairs, the city buildings. That was their number one priority, and why was that not funded? Seems like it's the highest priority. And what buildings? We're not talking about this building specifically.
We're talking about several buildings. The city owns several buildings across. There's things for, I believe, Steel Street, as well as a couple other buildings, just different repairs for it. The costs are pretty high, but we could try to break that down per building and see if we can.
Is there other places that could be taken out of? That,
For roof repairs?
yeah.
Yeah, we can take a look at that.
What was number one on their list? I thought.
Yeah,
There's one on the parks list too, and there's nothing there, and that's another $250,000.
Parks is a big one. That's a big roof.
I understand that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm just saying that is.
Yep. We'll pull that information for you.
Okay.
Other than that, we really encourage you guys to pass the master plan so we can get working on some of those other programs, especially the economic fund. We continue to have calls from small businesses and others that are looking for funding in order to either expand or to continue, especially during the pandemic. We still continue to get calls for people that really need support for their homes, try to better the housing stock here. Obviously, we've talked about plans for mental health and other community support as well, working with our mental health partners. All things that we're really eager to make a plan and present that to you guys. But we do not want to waste time, and I shouldn't say it's not wasting time. We don't want to put those together until we know the amount that we will potentially be allocated under that master plan. Other than that, questions on those projects? Okay. I have, that's all my updates. President Bills, I do have 2 items for executive session. I have one for collective bargaining, and I have one for pending litigation. No action to be taken on either of those.
Is there any other, anything else come before we go?
I would just like to publicly thank Patrick Smeraldo for spearheading the Christmas parade. It was a great night, the weather was beautiful, we had a significant turnout of people who I think were anxious to get outside and do something safely, but I want to really thank him because without him taking on that project and the people that volunteered with him, we probably would not have had that parade, and I did not want to wait till the next public council meeting because by then people will have forgotten, but it was very well run. I've heard nothing but great things from people who attended and how happy they were to see the turnout and what a spectacular event it was, including the fireworks. I did not stay to see, but I could hear them as I was leaving. But thank you very much to him. I think we really have a great community and great volunteers who are willing to step up and help out, so thank you to everybody. And the Toys for Tots campaign, they have 4,000 individuals that they plan to support for the Toys for Tots campaign. So there's a great need in the community and people have stepped up to help, so thank you to everybody.
I'll be seeing him later this week for a debrief, and I'll convey that.
Yeah, please let them know.
Do I have a motion to go into executive session?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye, opposed,